বিসমিল্লাহির রহমানির রহিম। সুপ্রিয় শিক্ষার্থী বন্ধুরা, এনভায়রনমেন্টাল ল ক্লাসের পঞ্চম কোশ্চেনে তোমাদেরকে সুস্বাগত। আমাদের আজকে আলোচ্য বিষয় হচ্ছে ইন্টারন্যাশনাল ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জ ল উইথ হিস্ট্রি, কিয়োটো প্রোটোকল, প্যারিস এগ্রিমেন্ট এক্সপ্লেনেশন। International climate change law is a specialized framework of public international law designed to mitigate a greenhouse gas GHG emission and manage the global impact of climate change. It operates primarily under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention Convention on Climate Change, Framework Convention on Climate Change, UN সামনে থাকবে, which serve as the fundamental umbrella for all subsequent global climate facts. The evolution of this legal regime is divided into three major phases: the foundational framework, the top-down approach of the Kyoto Protocol, and the bottom-up approach of the Paris Agreement. তাহলে কী পেলাম আমরা? দ্য কনভেনশন অন ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জ এর তিনটা ফেজ রয়েছে: দ্য ফান্ডামেন্টাল ফ্রেমওয়ার্ক, দ্য টপ ডাউন অ্যাপ্রোচ অফ দ্য কিয়োটো প্রোটোকল অ্যান্ড দ্য বটম আপ অ্যাপ্রোচ অফ দ্য প্যারিস এগ্রিমেন্ট। দ্য হিস্ট্রি অ্যান্ড ইভলিউশন প্রি UNFCCC, early science since 1980s. It will be since the IPCC creation. In 1988, the World Meteorological Organization WMO and United Nations Environment Program UNEP established the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change IPCC to provide authoritative scientific assessment on global warming. Early principles. These are established core environmental principles like the precautionary principle, acting despite scientific uncertainty, and the polluter pays principle. Number 2, the birth of the UNFCCC 1992 Rio Earth Summit. Adopted at the Rio Earth Summit 1992, the UNFCCC or United Nations Convention on Climate Change was formed, became the bedrock treaty of the international climate law. Core goal: its objective was to establish atmospheric greenhouse gas concentration to prevent dangerous human interference with the climate system. CBDR principle. It introduced the fundamental legal concepts of common but differentiated responsibilities. These acknowledge that while all nations must fight climate change, developed countries bear the historical burden of emission and have greater financial resources to act. Lack of target. The UNFCCC itself did not contain mandatory qualification emission limits for specific countries. It set up an annual meeting infrastructure called the Conference on the Paris COP to negotiate future legally binding protocol, the Kyoto Protocol 1997 to 2020. As global emission continued to rise, member states realized that voluntary framework was insufficient. This led to the adoption of Kyoto Protocol in December 1997, which enters into force in 2025. Key features: top-down, legally binding targets. Unlike UNFCCC, Kyoto set strict legally binding emission reducing targets. Annex 1 versus non-Annex 1. The protocol divided the world rigidly. It mandated 37 industrialized nations and European Union Annex 1 countries to reduce their GHG emission by an average of 5% below 1990s level during the first commitment period 2008 to 2012. Developing nation and non-Annex 1, including major emerging economies like India and China, had no mandatory emission targets. Flexible market mechanism. To minimize compliance course, Kyoto pioneered three market-based economic mechanism: emission trading, clean development mechanism (CDM), joint implementation (JI), limitation and decline. The Doha Amendment in 2012, the Doha Amendment extended the Kyoto Protocol for a second commitment period 2013 to 2020. Structural failure. The protocol ultimately weakened. The United Nations signed it but never ratified it. Canada later withdrew, and countries like Russia and Japan declined to join the second phase because it exempted developing nations and lacked key polluters. The protocol ultimately covered less than 20% of the global emission. Later comes Paris Agreement 2015 to present. Recognizing Kyoto limitations, the international community pivoted to a new legal architecture adopted at COP21 in December 2015. The Paris Agreement represents a massive paradigm shift in international law. Key features bottom up architectures. Instead of imposing top-down mandates, Paris Agreement every nation, developed and developing alike, to formulate their own climate action plan, nationally determined contribution and disease. The red chat mechanism under a mandatory 5-year cycle. Countries must submit updated NDCs. Each successive plan must represent a progression rate set up beyond the previous one, reflecting the country's highest possible ambition. Long-term temperature goal. The treaty legally locked in a target to hold global average temperature well below 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels, while actively pursuing effort to limit the scenes to 1.5 centigrade. Transparency and global stocktake. The agreement establishes an enhanced transparency framework for reporting. Every 5 years, a global stock take assesses collective progress to evaluate if the world is meeting its long-term goals. Climate finance, enforcement style, fear, pressure over penalties, and geopolitical fluctuation. Peer pressure over penalties. The Paris Agreement explicitly avoids punitive legal measure. It contains no enforcement mechanism to or code to penalize countries that miss their target. Instead, it relies on a system of global peer pressure, transparency, and public accountability. Last one, geopolitical fluctuation. Because of its political flexibility, participants changes with local government. For instance, the United Nations originally signed the deal, withdraws in 2020, rejoined in 2021, withdraws again 2026 under changes domestic administrations. Thank you very much.